Welcome everybody, it's Avi Tenenbaum with TFRP, and this is Emunah video number 2. This is really important. You gotta listen to the whole video until the end. Share it with other people. I put a lot of time into these videos because I want to save lives. I promise you that's my intent. And I think these ideas can save lives. What we're looking to do is to create a faith and a trust in God that will actually be practical, real, tangible, helpful, and make a difference in our lives. People watching this have gone through difficult things, are currently going through difficult things, and will go through difficult things. The world is going to go through difficult things, and we need faith, and we need it now. Reb Nachman of Breslov, I didn't quote him in the last video, but if you look in the Sefer Siach, I'm a little bit jumbled today. If you look in the Sefer Sichos Haran, Reb Nachman says that faith is like the walking stick, that whenever walking gets hard and difficult, you lean on that stick and it helps you get through really hard stuff. God created water so you don't get hydrated. God created faith so you don't lose hope and you become resilient. And this is the whole purpose of these videos. It gives me the greatest pleasure in the world. You pay me back when you share these videos, you hit like, you subscribe to the channel, and you make sure that these videos get to people that suffer or that need to hear them. That is the biggest way you can pay me back. I got a comment from somebody in TFRP last week. They found my WhatsApp and sent me a WhatsApp how the videos recently changed their life. This is the greatest pleasure that I can get in this world. So without any further ado, with the fancy paper of this week with tons of amazing sources, let's jump in. We're talking about faith, and we said this is not just a cutesy Torah class. This is practical, and it's meant to help us get through life. If we don't achieve that, it's useless. Torah is real, Torah is useful and purposeful. So, I'm going to tell you, I'm just turning on the fan because I'm a bit hot. I'm going to tell you 2 stories I read over Shabbos. And they're cute stories, they're interesting, they're important, and they're important for other people at a different time. And I want to show you what's wrong with the stories, okay? Story number 1 is that Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, I saw this in the Parsha sheet, Ish Ehu B'Ha'aloscha, this year, Taf Shin Pei Beis. Reb Chatzkel Levenstein used to be the mashgiach in the Mir, and 3 months before he knew he was going to leave the Mir, he decided to stop taking payment. He said he's not going to invest himself as much anymore in the Mir, so why should he take money? That's not fair. He was a very straight, righteous person. He left the Mir Yeshiva and became employed by the Panovich Yeshiva. And for the first 3 months he was at Panovich, he didn't have any money. For some reason they weren't paying him. He wasn't sure what to do. And it wasn't that he wasn't sure what to do because he was a weak-minded person. He wasn't sure that on his level of faith, if he should go and speak to the yeshiva administration and ask them about the money. Maybe he should have so much faith that he should just wait till money comes from the yeshiva. And he went to a rabbi in Jerusalem named Rav Shmuel Hamner. And he asked Rav Shmuel Hamner what to do. And obviously, if Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, who's so great, is asking Rav Shmuel Hamner advice, you can imagine who this guy, Rav Shmuel Hamner, was. But anyways, there's a lot of great people that you didn't hear about much. That's just the point I'm making. But Rav Shmuel Hamner said, Reb Chatzkel, you are on such a great level of Emunah, of faith in God, and bitachon, trusting in God, that for you personally, you shouldn't do anything. Don't go to the yeshiva office, don't say a word, trust in God, and the money will come to you. And that's how you will keep developing spiritually. Okay, fine. Rav Chatzkel gets on the bus, and he goes from Jerusalem, where Rav Hamner was, back to Bnei Brak. He gets off the bus, and a guy walks over and hands him a bag of money. And he says, I've been looking for you. You know, I had this money, the yeshiva paid me the money to give to you, but I needed it really bad for a loan, and I borrowed it, and I figured that you were getting severance pays from your previous job in the Mir, so I figured you could just wait a little bit till I paid you. Here's the money. So, amazing story, incredible. Rav Chatzkel wasn't sure what to do, and he went to Rav Hamner. He said, trust in God, because you're such a great guy, you're on such a level. And he did, and he gets off the bus, and boom, the money comes to him. That's story number 1. I'm going to tell you what's wrong with that story soon. Story number 2, I saw in the Sefer Siach Sarfei Kodesh, in my magical Svarim pile, Siach Sarfei Kodesh, amazing Sefer, a little bit hard to read, and some of it's in Yiddish. The Chacham Tzvi, who was a great Talmud Chacham in the generation of the Shabtai Tzvi, so we're going back a few hundred years, A guy once came to him and said, I wrote a sefer on Torah, can you please give me a haskama, an approbation on the sefer? And the Shabtai Tzvi, it looks and he sees a bunch of other rabbis gave this guy an approbation. Then he starts to flip through the sefer, and he sees a lot of innuendos and remazim that this author is a student of the Shabtai Tzvi who is a heretic. And he realizes that this guy is up to no good and he's hiding his heretical ideas within the book. So the Shabtai Tzvi quickly takes the book, the fireplace, tosses it into the fireplace, the thing goes up in flames, and the Shabtai Tzvi runs away. Not the Shabtai Tzvi, the Chacham Tzvi runs away. Because he knows he's going to get in trouble. You're going to have a lot of questions on the story, but that's for a different time. He takes the book, throws it into the fireplace, takes his family, and leaves. The guy is fuming mad, and the Chacham Tzvi knows this guy is going to call the police. The police are going to come and put him in jail. He can't just take somebody's manuscript and throw it in a fire. He runs away to Poland. And he's living in Poland, and he took with him a bag of gold coins that he earned through business. And every single day he would go to the currency exchange in Poland back then and take this gold coin and switch it in for some small change and buy what his family needed to live on. And this goes on day after day after day for a few months. And eventually they're down to their last coin, and he switches in the coin for some small change. They buy food, they eat the food, and his wife says to him, the Chacham Tzvi's wife says to him, that was our last coin, what are we going to do tomorrow? And he says, just like Hashem, God helped us all the way until now, we'll have faith that He's going to help us tomorrow. And all of a sudden, tomorrow, they don't know what to do. They wake up in the morning, they've got no food, they've got no money, and a guy knocks on their door, and he says, the Chacham Tzvi, does he live here? Yes, here I am, how can I help you? We've been looking all over for you. We want you to be the rabbi of Amsterdam. And Amsterdam was this massive congregation, and they had good money to pay the rabbi. He becomes the rabbi of Amsterdam, happily ever after, and they have Parnasa. What's wrong with these two stories? There's nothing wrong with them per se, but they have a lesson that most people don't need to hear right now. You know, these videos that we gear people, that we gear for the people on TFRP, they're geared for real people with real problems, and that's the idea, TFRP, Torah for real people. In other words, those two stories convey that when things are hard, simply trust in God and it will work out, it will be perfect. It's like a vending machine, and you stick in a quarter, and you move around the joystick, and you get that claw to come down, grab what you want, and give it to you, right? And then you won the prize. So whenever you come up short-handed, you're going through a divorce, you're going through debt, you're going through an addiction, simply have faith and it will all work out. And this is a big mistake. I think it's also a mistake in faith, and you can look in the Sefer Emunah and Bitachon from the Chazon Ish. He says this is a very great error in how people perceive what faith and trust in God means. It's not just a magical trick that whenever you want something, you turn on the faith and then it comes to you. The thing comes to you. The money comes to you. The watch comes to you, right? Famous story of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter about faith, and a guy hands him a gold watch. That's not how this works. It might work that way for some people on a very high level. Maybe we're responsible to work there. But my point is that's not the lesson that most people need to hear who are suffering day to day. We're small people. We're simple people. And the type of faith that I first want to teach on TFRP is not that lesson, but the lesson that faith is a reservoir of hope and strength when things are bad. And if we think faith and trust is just this way to run away from what's going on and pretend and delude ourselves that things will be okay fast, and all we need to do is have faith for 10 minutes, and boom, a new house will come our way. Boom, our mental health challenges will just vanish, and boom, we'll find a shidduch, and boom, our child who died will come back to life. It doesn't work that way. I want us to talk about a faith that's realistic, it's genuine, it's rooted in reality, and we're here to stay. And here we are in this tough situation, and yet the faith is going to come and help us to grow. That's the type of faith that I want to start with on TFRP. That's a real, genuine faith. From that faith, you can get to the faith that those stories are describing, and one day we'll get to those too. But you can't start that way. You have to start this way and then get there. So that is point number 1, and I'm just looking on my fancy paper. Let's talk about now what faith isn't. What is faith not? Okay? And again, this is the thing. I have so many pet peeves about Torah classes out there that are lacking depth, they're lacking scholarship, they're teaching people a Judaism that is based on fluff. And they're not scholars, they don't have enough sources, they don't have a breadth and width of knowledge to understand when they teach a topic. So they teach like this 5% piece of a topic without all the pieces around it giving it a context. And that's what we're trying to do today. What faith is not. Okay? So says the Sefer Lukutei Eitzos from Rav Nachman of Breslov and Rav Nassan in Emunah Daled. Anything you can logically understand does not require faith. So the fact that you have an idea in your head, oh, there's a God. God is one. He exists. He's everywhere. That's not faith. Okay? The same thing in a different source. Says Reb Chatzkel Levenstein. The things that you learned in kindergarten and in day school about God, that is not faith. That is not Emunah. Those are ideas. Ideas is not Emunah. It might help to lead to Emunah, but that is not faith. So he says, what you learned in high school, that is not faith. What you learned in kindergarten, that's not faith. Says Reb Chatzkel further, ideas that do not evoke fear in heaven is not faith. If it doesn't cause you more fear of heaven and make you change your behavior, and now you are fearing God more, then the things that you had in your head were ideas. They were not faith. Faith is something that causes you to fear God more. So if it didn't do that, it's not faith. And this is going to get into a separate topic that we have to talk about a different day. There's something called, pardon me, I have a cold. There's something called Ktane Emunah. If you look in Parshas Noach, right, it says that Noach spoke to God, he built this big ark, and then it starts raining, but before it was raining, Noach was kind of not sure if it would rain, it wouldn't rain, and he was kind of waiting to see what would happen, and Rashi there says from the Chazal, Noach was Miktane Emunah. He had very small faith. Small faith means that he kind of had faith a little bit for something, but not enough. It wasn't enough to move him forward, okay? We also know as well about Noach that God helped him out. Without God's help, some say that he wouldn't have been anything in the generation of Avraham Avinu, right? But the point is, when we have a tiny bit of faith but not enough to get anywhere significant, that's called Ktane Emunah, right? You see somebody that they keep like some of the mitzvahs but not other of the mitzvahs, and they're kind of like selective. So, okay, you're not religious, I get that. You're fully religious, I get that. But this like quasi in the middle thing, and I'm not talking about traditional Jews, I'm talking about Orthodox Jews. I'm talking about ultra-Orthodox Jews, that they kind of like pick and choose what they do. What is that? The Sfarim say that's called Ktane Emunah. They have a tiny bit of faith, but not really enough. It's like you have 1 8-ounce cup of gasoline in your car. So it can get you like somewhere, but not really anywhere significant. So these ideas are found in Reb Chatzkel Levenstein and the Sefer Eitzos Rabbeinu Yechezkel Emunah, page 12. And I'm going to try at the end of this video to put all of these sources, because I know most people don't have these books around, okay? Next thing, okay? Says the Sefer Siach Sarfei Kodesh. I'm going to show it again, because I don't think so many people know about this book. It's 3 volumes. It's from students of the Kotzker Rebbe and the students of that generation and the generation after. They bring a story about Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. I was at his grave a few times in Ukraine. Says the Kedushas Levi, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, that he once went to Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg for Shabbos and for a weekend, and to learn about who this guy was, and to learn from him how to serve God. Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg was a great rabbi, and Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was a person that grew a lot. And he wanted to learn from this person. He spends time with him, he comes back home, and his family says, "No, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, what did you learn from Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg?" And Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev says, "I learned from Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg that there is a God in heaven." That was his comment, right? Sounds like a very Hasidic story. And Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev's family, the Berditchev family, they said, "You went all the way there for all that time to learn that there's a God in heaven? Everybody knows that there's a God in heaven. And so they called over the Ukrainian maid, who was this young maid in the house, and they said, "Maid, is there a God in heaven?" "Oh yeah, sure, of course, everybody knows there's a God in heaven." And so they looked back at Rav Levi Yitzchak and said, "What was the point of your trip? We don't get it." And Rav Levi Yitzchak said, "The maid said that there's a God, but by me going to Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg, I now know that there's a God. I know it inside of me. I know it. I feel it. I know it." If you look in the Sefer Ale Shor Chelek Beis, okay, this was out of print for a while. When it came in print, I was so excited. I put this on my WhatsApp status. I told people it's in print. Rav Volba says in this book, I think it's page Tuf Ayin Hey, that faith is something that you know it so clearly, it's unshakable, nothing can change it. That's the opposite of Ktane Emunah, right? Where you kind of just like, you know it a little bit. No, faith is something that's so much, it's unshakable, you know it, you see it, you experience it. You have this experiential knowledge that will never go away. And that's what Rav Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was saying about his trip to Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg. I learned and saw the way this guy related to God, that God exists in heaven, and I know it with such clarity that that type of faith will never leave me. It will never go away. That was the point. Another thing, here's a story about the Vorka Rebbe. And all these ideas are building on one another. Listen to this video all the way to the end, because we're all building on some really important ideas. There was once an amazing Rebbe called the Vorka Rebbe, and I think Shlomo Carlebach has some really incredible stories about him if you listen to his stories. The River of Tears, I think he's in that story, the River of Tears. So I once learned with a descendant of the Vorka Rebbe in yeshiva, and this guy was a superstar in yeshiva. He wasn't born great, he worked on himself very, very much, and he was an inspiration for me when I was young and impressionable. And I actually have his shtender from yeshiva all the way till this day, Cyril Kalish. The name of the Vorka Rebbe was Kalish, Cyril Kalish, Rabbi Cyril Kalish in Lakewood. If you know him, tell him that I'm still inspired by him and I have his shtender. So this shtender is from 20-something years ago. So says the Siach Sarfei Kodesh in the book about Emunah, Yud Beis, that the Vorka Rebbe sat with his students once, and they sat there all night together around the table, and the Vorka Rebbe was meditating and meditating and meditating, and the students were waiting to see what's he going to say. Eventually he's going to say something, right? They waited hours. And eventually the Vorka Rebbe opened his mouth, and he said in Yiddish, and I'm going to say it in English, "Praised is the Jew that knows that when he says God is one, that God is really one." And that was what he had to say after hours of meditation. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a faith that it's so tangible, it's so real, it's experiential, you can feel it, you can touch it. It's in you, you're inside of it. That faith can carry us through life and through difficult situations. It can explain to us things, it can help us understand things, and get us through difficulty. And I bet you that type of faith can even get you things that you want. But that's not why we're learning it, in order to get things that we want. That's what we said before. Faith is not a vending machine where you put in a quarter and you move the claw to get the prize that you want. That's not what it is. Okay, moving right along, we're doing great pace in this shir. The next thing is, a lot of the Sfarim talk about there are prerequisites that make faith possible, okay? One of the things that we said that makes faith possible is a fear of heaven. If you don't have a fear of heaven, and you don't even know what a fear of heaven means, you don't know what Yiras Shamayim means, you will not get this faith. And that's a problem, because again, we need this faith to get through life. The psychologists are talking so much about resilience. I studied those studies. I talk about that. I teach that around the world. But our own Torah has a way for us to be resilient. There's a whole brilliant arm of study, and it's called Emunah and Bitachon. And we're not going to get it and use it in our lives if we don't dive into this and understand scientifically what are the prerequisites, how do I get there, how do I pave the road in order to find this faith that we're describing, okay? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says in the Sefer Kedosh Yisrael, page Samech Beis, and again I'll put it in the end of the video, Blinetter, fear of heaven is a prerequisite for faith. Why is that? I think it's simple, because we're going to see soon, if our ego gets in the way, then we're not going to find faith, but we're going to find our biases. We're going to find what we want. And faith isn't about what we want, but what God does and what God wants. So if your ego is in the way between you and faith, you're not going to find faith. But if you have a conviction and you say, I want to serve God, I want to serve Him, I want to be the best servant of God that I could be, and I'm willing and open and accept anything that comes my way to serve God. God says do this, I'll do it. I'll do it without any strings attached. I will have fear of heaven. That mindset will lead us to the faith that we're describing, which will help us to get through life. Another thing is, says Reb Nachman in the Sefer, I think it was in my Magic Sfarim pile, Lekutei Eitzos Emunah Aleph. I think it's over there. Reb Nachman of Breslov says that a prerequisite to faith is truth, Emunah, emes, truth. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit off today, but that doesn't mean we can't teach Torah. If we don't care about truth, if we don't have the moral value of truth, we're never going to find faith. The road to find the faith that we're describing is through truth. In fact, says Reb Nachman, an amazing, incredible thing in that piece, Reb Nachman of Breslov writing on behalf of Reb Nachman, that the principles of faith, there's a big question, right? People always want to understand it first and then believe in it. And this is a big topic that a lot of the books talk about. You can look in the Handbook of Jewish Thought of Reb Aryeh Kaplan. He has a bunch about this in the very beginning of the book. But it doesn't work that way because, again, then you're going to fall back into the bias of ego, right? Because I want this. Well, why should it be that way? I want it to be this way. The way faith works is you first look at truth. And Reb Nachman says, we have inside of us a consciousness and a godliness. And if we're able to get into our God consciousness and out of our mindless, sleepy state where our ego runs the world, and instead we step out of that place and we try to look at the truth, not what I want, but what the truth is and what I should be doing, what I should be putting my resources into and investing into, that road will lead us to truth. And Reb Nachman says, if you have the moral value of truth, you will be able to see the principles of faith even from far away. Like imagine that you're in a ship and you're lost at sea, right? Think of Gilligan's Island, because I grew up in that generation, and far, far away, you see what looks to you to be land. And you go, land, land, oh my God, land, right? And you get all excited. You can see the land from far, far away. You're not quite there yet. You don't know much about it, but you see it's there. Reb Nachman says truth is like that. If you have truth, it's like seeing the faith in those principles from far away, and that leads you to faith. And then says Reb Nachman and Reb Nachman that once you have faith, it will help you to actually understand the principles of faith. The whole world wants to first understand and then believe. But it's the opposite. By believing, you'll then understand, and we're going to talk about that more soon. Going back to this idea of being asleep and being egotistical and self-centered and how that gets in the way of faith, I recommend you look in the book Ale Shor Chelik Beis, which I just showed you, page Tuf Ayin Hey to Tuf Pei. He says that we're like drunkards. We're drunk, and so we're walking around, and we're talking, and we're doing things, but we're in such a restricted state of consciousness, our ego gets in the way, we're thinking in such a silly, small-minded manner, and he says that level of consciousness, which is so restricted, and this egocentric way of going through life, me, right? That's not going to lead you to faith. So you're going to have to move out of your own way. You're going to have to lower your ego. You're going to have to put yourself in your own place and see who you are and see the greatness of God and have the willingness to come towards God. And he says that when we sin and when we live in this mindless way, we're asleep, we're drunk. We have to sober up, right? They say the urban legend that if you take a shower, it sobers you up, or if you wait a long time at least, it sobers you up. You drink water, it sobers you up. So we've got to sober up, and there are steps we need to take to wake ourselves up. And there are various methods that we can use to wake ourselves up, and that's what Reb Volba there is discussing. But you won't even wake up if you don't realize you're asleep. You have to first wake up. Wake up! Sorry for the yell, right? But that's, we're like sleeping heavily in the morning, and we refuse to wake up. We're going to go through life 50, 60, 70, 80 years asleep. And that's a big problem, right? and so we have to wake up and realize we're on the wrong trajectory. We're not in the right state of mind to find God, and we got to move out of our own way and find God and wake up. Okay. Moving right along, and we're coming almost towards the end of the beginning for sure. Says Reb Nachman in the Sefer Midos, Emunah, number 7. Without preparing one's mind to grow in faith and realizing that he has to change his state of mind, he will not find faith. And that really fits in with what we said from Reb Volba just now, right? Says further Reb Nachman, if you find yourself struggling with faith, be quiet. Be quiet, be silent. And the silence will eventually answer your questions. Isn't that amazing? And that makes sense in light of what we just said, because when we get in our own way, in this egotistical, restricted way of thinking, Ani va'afsi oid, I'm the only one that matters. Everything is about me and how I want things and how I expect things. We're not going to find faith, and we're not going to find answers, because the answers don't lie there. The answers lie in faith, but you won't get the faith till you move out of the way. So says Reb Nachman, it's a one-line sentence, but it's a brilliant sentence. If you find yourself struggling with something and you don't have the faith to answer it, be silent. Be quiet. And when you're quiet, you'll be able eventually to hear the answer that will answer your questions. It's a little bit like there's an old saying in the 12-step world, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth and stop talking, right? A lot of times people who are drunkards, who are addicted to drugs, they're addicted to alcohol, addicted to whatever it is, and they come to the 12-step program, and their sponsor, who's got 21 years of sobriety, he wants to teach them how to get sober, but they're so busy with their ideas, telling the whole world about themselves, that they're not listening. And the sponsor says, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth so you can start listening. So maybe the ideas of faith are out there, but we have to be quiet and hear the answers. And this is a really interesting sentence that Reb Nachman said in Sefer Hamidos Emunah Tes Vav. Okay. Moving right along, coming to the end. There's this idea that the Sfarim say that if you then look for faith and move all these things out of the way that are getting in the way, and now we're on the road to faith, and then we find faith, the faith will answer our questions and help us understand. It won't just be a dumb faith without understanding. It will help us to understand, and then we will also be able to use our book smarts and our intellect. It will all blend together. That's how they describe how it works. So just being a dimwit that just has blind faith forever without studying anything and using critical thinking, says Reb Nachman in Likutei Moharan, Volume 1, 255. There's better sources than that one. That one is talking in a particular context. But anyhow, if you just are a dimwit and you don't think for yourself, that's not a type of faith that will be sustainable. So there is a place for logic and understanding and faith together. Again, if you go back to Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's book, The Handbook of Jewish Faith, this is volume number 2. The very first 9 pages is about this topic of how much knowledge do you have, how much faith do you have, is there a room for blind faith, and which one do you start with? But the point is, you first start with, we said, wanting to have Yiras Shamayim, wanting to wake up from our sleep, move our ego out of the way, seeking truth. When we do all that and we're quiet, that will lead us on the road towards faith. Okay? Once we have faith, then we'll begin to understand the things that we were grappling with. Reb Nachman says in Sefer Amidos 25, jealousy gets in the way of faith. And even if you had faith, but then you become jealous, that too is going to pull you away from faith, because it goes back to the ego. It goes back to the same thing again, this idea, where it's ego versus faith. What I want versus what is God's plan. Okay. Said Reb Nachman, by believing with Emunah, we will eventually come to understand the things we grapple with. That Sefer Amidos, Emunah 19, 20, and 25. I'm going to finish with one last thing. Says the Sefer Siach Sarfei Kodesh that we said before, in Emunah number 7, from Reb Nassan of Breslov. And I was a bit surprised. I didn't know that he quotes Reb Nassan of Breslov, but he quotes him too, because it's not a Breslov book. There is a Breslov book called Siach Sarfei Kodesh. That's a different book, brought out by a teacher of mine that died, Rev Avram Weizsänder. This is a different book, which is a few 100 years old, about 200 years old. Says the Siach Sarfei Kodesh, faith is the microscope under which you will then be able to understand what you're looking at. In other words, let's say that if you follow the news, there's all these hearings about UFOs recently. And there was a hearing in the Senate in the United States about UFOs, and they have different ways of measuring the UFOs, and they don't know what it is, and different physicists are talking about this, and military experts. And we don't exactly know what these things are, but they fly between Mach 5 to Mach 20, and they seem to have no propulsion system, and they're just like defying everything we know about objects and how they move and things like that, right? I think somebody said that they can drop an altitude of 70,000 feet per second, which is, we don't have such technology. Okay. We don't know what that is. That's a UFO. It's unidentified, right? That's what a UFO is. We don't know what it is. We see something, we don't know what it is. Imagine you created a laboratory with which you had such instruments that you can observe what you're looking at better than ever before. And by observing and studying enough years with enough instruments and scientific methods, you will eventually gather enough data to create a picture about what you're looking at, right? Says Reb Nassan of Breslov in the Seach Sarfi Kodesh of Kotsk, number 7, that faith is something far away, because you're starting out, right? And when you start out, it's far away from you. And then, as you move the things out of the way and move towards faith, you're now seeing God and the principles of faith, which we didn't even get into yet. What are the principles of faith? Knowing that God exists, God is everywhere, everything comes from God, God is aware of everything, God pays back good and evil, all the 13 principles of faith, etc., right? When we then live with that and believe that without ego being involved in the way, and we experience faith enough, that's the laboratory with which we can see firsthand the principles of faith. Not just ideas in our head from kindergarten, not just lip service that we read from the Siddur, but things that we start to feel and experience and carry into life. And once we start acting on these principles and doing them and feeling back what they do for us in life, and we have this experiential knowledge, that is the laboratory from which we gather the data to understand what it is that we're believing in. Then we understand these beliefs. And so, Emunah doesn't have to be something that only dimwits do. It's something that you start off without understanding, but you eventually come to a very profound understanding. And I don't claim to have any faith, but I can claim that I personally had some sort of transformation from the way I learned about faith when I was a child to the way I am now. And again, it's something experiential. It's like you can read a book about how to swim, but you're not going to really know what it means till you're in a pool, they throw you in the deep end, and now you got to swim. That's what this process is. I invite all of us to embark on the journey to faith, and then eventually to understanding with faith, which is the most sustainable thing, and to move all the things out of our way so that we get the real faith that the Torah is talking about, the unshakable, incredible, deep, experiential feeling of God and God's Torah and His goodness, which will maybe also even get us what we want, but isn't the point, which is how we started the whole talk. So, I'm telling you, if you study most shiurim in Emunah and Bitachon, they're missing the boat. You need a big, wide, broad perspective, and I want this to be our perspective because I think this is going to get us to a quality faith that's going to help us get through difficult times in life. You know, I was thinking recently about World War III. I saw a video somebody was sending around about how to prepare for World War III, and they were saying what type of supplies you would need to get. And I was thinking, you know what supply I need to get for World War III? Tons of faith. Right? I have a book, I think I put it away already. It's called, in Hebrew it's called B'Seisar Ra'am, and in English it was translated, I think it's called Hidden in Thunder by Esther Farbstein. Just an example of a book where they did a academic study about the Holocaust to see what was leadership like during the Holocaust and what was people's faith like during the Holocaust. And I can only imagine, God forbid, being in the Holocaust back in 1939, and, you know, things are coming our way, Kristallnacht, whatever, which, that was on my birthday, November 9th, Goyish birthday, and and I say, oh my God, what do we need? Rifles, bullets, food. We got to run into the forest and join the partisans with the Bielski brothers, one of my favorite stories. I would say no. Not that no, I'm saying those are good things, but we need faith. We're going to go through difficult stuff. What's going to carry us through? Like Reb Nachman said, we need a walking stick. If you climb mountains, you sometimes have gear that helps you climb up that mountain to get to those places that are really hard to get to and to be there. You climb Mount Everest, you need gear, and you need a guide. And faith is the gear, and the Torah is the guide. And that's what we're trying to do. It's a practical thing. Every single video we make in TFRP is real and practical and meant for people in the worst situations. People who lost a child, people with terminal illness, people going through a divorce, people struggling with schizophrenia, you name it. The Torah is there to help us, but we need to be realistic and create a dialogue of Torah that actually is helpful and practical, and that's what we're trying to do. Please, if you find this interesting, helpful, practical, share this video. It's one in a series of many. Bli neder, God willing. We're trying to build this step by step until we become those people with faith. It's going to take a bunch of time. We can't just get there fast. If we want to get there somewhere which is a quality place to get to, it's going to take time. Medical school takes time. Being a Navy SEAL takes time. This is going to take some time, but it's worthwhile. I bless us all a beautiful week of understanding these ideas, applying them in our own lives, and I'm the first one that has to apply it, to be humble, to seek truth, move our ego out of the way, try to seek fear of God, put myself out of the picture and see what God wants for me and has in store for me, to accept it with love and with faith, and to realize everything is for the best, which we didn't even begin to talk about these topics. We'll have to get there because those are very big and difficult topics to grapple, but we should at least start to embark on this road, and we'll get there. Have a good week.